All right, welcome back, everyone. Today, we're going to be doing a deep dive into something super practical.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, we're talking like a toolkit for life,
I like that.
dealing with, understanding and managing your mood, and then how to deal with things like anxiety and stress, and even navigating
The big
relationships.
stuff.
All the big stuff,
Yeah.
exactly. And our guide for this deep dive is Dr. Julie Smith's book, Why Has Nobody Told Me This Before?
Yeah, it's a good one,
So it's packed with advice you can actually use.
which is always refreshing.
Yes, very much so.
Sometimes you read these self-help books and you're like, okay, but how?
Yeah, how do I actually put this into practice?
Right.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit.
Let's do it.
Dr. Smith kicks things off by talking about low mood, which I think is something we all experience, those down days we all have.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And, she makes a point that it's just part of being human.
Yeah, and what's interesting is how she compares managing low mood to managing your home's temperature. You don't wait until you're freezing to adjust the thermostat.
Right.
So why do we let those low feelings fester instead of taking action earlier?
It's so true.
Right.
I'm definitely guilty of that.
Yeah, me too.
So what kind of action can we take?
Well, Dr. Smith talks about this downward spiral that happens when we're feeling down.
Hmm.
And it's not just in our heads. It's a cycle
Oh,
involving thoughts, feelings, physical sensations, and even our behaviors.
So it's like everything is feeding off of everything else, making it worse.
Exactly. But here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Because this cycle has all these different components, it means there are multiple points where we can intervene.
So we actually have more control than we think.
Way more.
I love that. I love how she compares working on our mental health to taking care of our physical health.
Yeah.
We brush our teeth every day, we try to get some exercise in,
Right.
but sometimes we wait for a mental breakdown before we start taking care of our mental well-being.
Totally. It's like, why do we do that? It's so much better to be proactive.
So true.
Right.
Okay, speaking of being proactive, Dr. Smith talks about thought patterns and these sneaky thought biases we all have.
Oh, the sneaky thought biases, yeah?
Like mind reading,
Oh, yeah.
where you just think you know what other people are thinking, like when you spill something on your shirt.
And you're like, everyone's looking at me.
Exactly.
They're all judging me.
We're like all or nothing thinking,
Ah, yes.
where everything is either amazing or terrible with no in between.
The drama. Our brains love a bit of drama.
Don't they?
They do.
They do.
And Dr. Smith has this very relatable example about social media where, like, you could get tons of positive comments on a post, but your brain just laser focuses on that one slightly negative one.
Oh, it's so true. The classic negativity bias. It's like our brains are Velcro for negative experiences and Teflon for positive ones.
Oh, I like that. Velcro for negative, Teflon for positive.
Right. But thankfully, Dr. Smith gives us tools to combat these biases.
Mindfulness is a big one.
Yeah, mindfulness.
And it's not about becoming some kind of, positivity robot.
Right.
It's more like being the CEO of your attention, choosing what you're going to give airtime to in your mind.
I love that analogy.
It's a good one, right? You get to decide
You do.
what you focus on.
That's really helpful.
Yeah. So think about it. What do you usually focus on when you're feeling a bit down? It can be really interesting to notice those patterns.
Yeah, definitely.
And, when you catch yourself spiraling with those, that endless thought loop that Dr. Smith calls rumination.
Yeah.
Sometimes even simple things like changing your physical position can help to shift your mental state.
Really?
Yeah. Even just standing up, stretching can make a difference.
That's good to know. I tend to just kind of curl up on the couch when I'm down.
Oh, yeah, we all have our go-to, right? But sometimes just a little shift in perspective can make a big difference.
Okay. So let's say you are having a rough day. How can we use these tools to turn things around?
Well, Dr. Smith talks about making good decisions, not perfect ones, during tough times.
I like that. So it's more about progress over perfection.
Exactly.
Okay.
Small, sustainable changes that you could actually stick with, rather than trying to overhaul your whole life at once.
Right.
And this ties into self-compassion, which is so important.
Yeah.
Dr. Smith makes this really interesting point that beating yourself up actually makes motivation worse, not better.
Whoa, that's interesting.
Right.
I always thought that self-criticism pushed you to do better.
It seems logical.
Yeah.
But think about it. When you're constantly criticizing yourself, it creates this cycle of shame and self-doubt. It drains your energy.
Oh, yeah.
And makes it harder to take positive action.
So giving yourself a break can actually help you move forward.
It can. It's about recognizing that we're all human.
Yeah.
We all make mistakes, and that's okay.
Yeah.
You can learn from setbacks without all that negative self-talk.
Mind blown.
It's a real game changer when you start practicing self-compassion.
Now, Dr. Smith also talks about these foundational needs that she calls our defense players.
Yes, I love that analogy.
It's such a good analogy.
It's so clear, right?
It is.
She compares them to the defense on a football team. Even with the best offensive players, you're not going to win if your defense can't hold its own.
Right.
It's the same with our mental health.
So which defense players are we talking about here?
The basics: exercise, sleep, nutrition, and routine.
Okay.
And the good news is you don't need to be perfect in any of these areas.
That's good enough, right?
Exactly. Even small changes can make a huge difference.
I like that.
Like having a solid evening routine
Yeah.
can really help to improve your sleep quality.
Okay.
And even a little bit of movement, you don't need to be running marathons,
Right.
but just getting your body moving can have a huge impact on your mood and your energy levels.
And I like that Dr. Smith doesn't push any one specific diet.
Right, it's not about that.
It's just the fundamentals that good eating patterns have in common.
Exactly. It's about focusing on those fundamental principles:
Yeah.
whole, unprocessed foods, healthy fats, and things like that. Think Mediterranean diet kind of style.
Okay, so we've got our defense players in place.
Yes.
But what about when you know what to do, but you just don't feel like doing it?
Oh, the motivation struggle. It's real.
It is real. Dr. Smith really challenges this idea that motivation is just some fixed trait.
It's so liberating, isn't it?
Yeah.
To realize that you're not just stuck with whatever motivation you have right now.
Yeah, she says that it's something we can actually cultivate.
It's like a muscle you can train.
She talks about procrastination as often being about avoiding discomfort, which I think we can all relate to.
Oh, for sure. Sometimes it just feels easier to avoid the thing altogether.
Right. And her advice is, if something truly matters to you, do it even when you don't feel like it.
Even when it's hard.
Remember that hilarious story about Dr. Smith's grandfather and the Garvin strimmer?
Oh, yes. The red button.
He specifically told her, whatever you do not press that red button.
And of course,
And of course,
she had to press it.
she couldn't resist.
Classic.
I mean, it's such a great example of how powerful those urges to avoid things can be.
And how important it is to find ways to manage those urges.
Yeah.
And do the things that really matter, even when they're a little uncomfortable at first.
Yeah, so true. Speaking of uncomfortable, let's shift gears a bit and talk about anxiety.
Okay, let's do it.
We all know anxiety can be this, helpful survival mechanism.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like that fight or flight response,
Keeps us safe.
but sometimes it misfires.
Yeah, for sure.
And it causes more trouble than it's worth.
More trouble than it's worth. Like in that relatable story Dr. Smith tells about having a panic attack at the top of the Leaning Tower of Pisa.
Wait, seriously, even a clinical psychologist can have panic attacks?
It just goes to show that anxiety can truly affect anyone.
Yeah.
And what's important to understand is that trying to eliminate anxiety completely can actually backfire.
Oh, why is that? I always thought less anxiety is always better.
You'd think so, right? But it actually prevents you from learning how to manage it effectively.
Okay.
Because when you constantly avoid the things that trigger your anxiety, you never get the chance to build up your tolerance or develop those coping mechanisms.
Okay, so think about it. Do you tend to avoid things that make you anxious?
We all do it to some extent,
Yeah.
right? And it's really helpful to become aware of those patterns.
What are some common safety behaviors? Dr. Smith outlines a lot of them in the book.
Oh, yeah, things like escaping situations, always seeking reassurance, or doing little rituals to try to feel safe.
Oh.
But while those behaviors might offer some temporary relief, they actually reinforce that cycle of anxiety in the long run.
So they prevent you from realizing that you can actually handle the discomfort.
Exactly. And that the anxiety will eventually pass on its own.
So how can we calm anxiety in the moment?
Well, Dr. Smith has some practical strategies for managing those physical symptoms,
Okay.
and she emphasizes breathing techniques as a key tool.
Oh, yeah, breathing. That makes sense.
Because when we're anxious, our breathing gets all messed up.
Yeah, it does.
And that actually makes the anxiety worse.
Hmm.
So breathing techniques help to regulate our nervous system and calm things down.
So there's a physiological reason behind it?
There is. It's not just some woo-woo thing.
I love her square breathing exercise because it uses a simple visual to help you remember the steps.
Yeah.
It's like you're drawing a square with your breath.
I love that one too. And physical movement is also incredibly helpful. When you're anxious, your body gets flooded with stress hormones.
It's that fight or flight response kicking in.
Exactly. And physical activity helps your body to actually process those hormones
Okay.
and regulate your nervous system.
So find a way to move that you actually enjoy.
That's key.
Yeah.
Whether it's going for a run, dancing, or just taking a brisk walk, yeah, anything to get that body moving.
Okay, so we can use breathing and movement to kind of calm our bodies down.
Yes.
But what about those pesky, anxious thoughts that can just spiral out of control?
Oh, yeah, those thoughts can definitely fuel the fire, can't they?
Yeah.
It's so easy to get caught up in those worst-case scenarios and those what-ifs.
Dr. Smith emphasizes that our thoughts aren't facts.
Such an important reminder.
They're just one interpretation of our experience.
And unfortunately, our brains tend to overestimate threats and underestimate our ability to cope.
Yeah, they do. So how do we get some distance from those thoughts?
Well, one technique Dr. Smith suggests is using distanced language.
Okay.
So instead of saying, I'm going to fail this presentation, you could say, I'm having the thought that I might fail this presentation. You see how that creates a little bit of separation?
Yeah, almost like you're observing the thought rather than being totally consumed by it.
Exactly. Helps you to see it as just a thought, not a prediction of the future.
Okay.
Dr. Smith also talks about writing down those anxious thoughts.
Oh, like journaling.
Yeah, it can be
Yeah.
really helpful to get them out of your head and onto paper. It helps you to see them more objectively and realize they might not be as rational as they feel in the moment.
So what are some common anxious thought patterns we should watch out for?
Well, there's catastrophizing,
Oh, yeah.
where you automatically jump to the worst-case scenario.
Oh, I do that all the time.
We all do. Our brains are wired for survival,
Right?
so they tend to focus on potential threats.
And then there's overgeneralizing, where you take one negative experience and apply it to, like, everything in your life.
Oh, yeah, the classic, if this happened once, it's going to happen again and again.
Like, if you have one bad date, you assume you'll never find love.
Exactly. It's like our brains are trying to create these rules to protect us.
Oh.
But those rules can be really limiting.
Yeah.
So the key is to learn to recognize these patterns and to challenge them.
And remember, they're just biases, not facts.
Exactly.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. Low mood, mindfulness, the defense players, motivation, and even tackling anxiety in the moment.
It's a lot.
It feels like we're really building up this mental health toolkit.
We are. And that's the beauty of Dr. Smith's book. It's like a toolbox full of practical strategies that you can start using right away.
Exactly.
So you can start feeling better and living a more fulfilling life
So true.
starting today.
Now that you've learned some strategies for managing your own inner world, let's talk about navigating the outer world.
Oh, good.
Starting with relationships. They can be an incredible source of joy, but also, let's be real, a major source of stress sometimes.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure. And Dr. Smith brings up this really fascinating point about relationships. The myth that we should always be happy in our relationships can actually make them less stable.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's like we're setting ourselves up for failure from the start.
Yeah. I think a lot of us buy into that myth, though.
Oh, totally.
We see these picture-perfect couples on social media,
Right.
and we think, oh, that's the norm.
Yeah.
But that expectation of constant bliss is just setting us up for disappointment because disagreements are inevitable.
Exactly. You can't spend that much time with another human being
Right.
and always be on the same page.
It makes you wonder if some of those picture-perfect couples are actually just sweeping their problems under the rug.
100%.
Maybe a little healthy conflict is a good sign.
It can be, definitely. It's about respecting each other's individuality and realizing that conflict is a normal part of any relationship.
Yeah.
It's how you handle those conflicts that really matters.
That's so true.
So think about your own relationship beliefs for a second. Are they adding to the stress you're feeling?
That's a good question for everyone to consider.
Yeah.
Now, Dr. Smith also tackles the topic of knowing when to seek professional help for your mental health,
Yeah.
which can be a tough conversation to have.
It can be, but Dr. Smith's message is very clear. It's okay to reach out for support. Struggling with your mental health doesn't mean you're failing at all.
I think a lot of people have this idea that therapy is only for people who are having some major crisis. Like,
Yeah.
you don't have to hit rock bottom to ask for help.
Absolutely not. Reaching out early on can actually prevent things from getting worse.
And I think that's where that self-compassion comes in again.
Yes.
Being kind to yourself and knowing that you're not alone.
Exactly. Everyone deserves support during difficult times, and there's no need to suffer in silence.
Okay, now for a topic that I think we all face at some point in our lives, grief.
Oh, yeah, it's a universal experience.
It is, and it can be incredibly painful.
It can be so unpredictable, too.
Yeah.
You might feel fine one minute, and then suddenly you're just hit with this wave of sadness.
Yeah, and it can be so physically and emotionally draining.
It affects us on so many levels.
Yeah.
It's not just emotional. You might have physical symptoms, too,
Right.
like fatigue or changes in appetite.
And I think that's what makes it so difficult is it feels like your whole world's been turned upside down.
Yeah, it really can. And trying to block out those feelings or pretend you're not grieving can actually make things harder in the long run.
Almost like you're adding another layer of stress.
Exactly. It's important to allow yourself to feel those emotions, to cry, if you need to talk about your loss.
Yeah.
Dr. Smith emphasizes that there's no right or wrong way to grieve. Everyone's experience is unique.
So you don't need to compare yourself to other people
No,
or feel like you need to move on by a certain timeline.
right. She's not a fan of those like stage-based models of grief that suggest there's this set path everyone has to follow.
Right.
It's not about checking boxes. It's about honoring your own unique grieving process.
And recognizing that you don't have to go through it alone.
Exactly. Reach out to friends, family, a therapist,
Yeah.
anyone who can offer support during those tough times.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about something that I know I definitely struggle with, people pleasing.
Oh, yeah. I think a lot of people can relate to that.
It's so easy to fall into that trap.
It is. You want to make everyone happy.
You're just wired to put other people's needs before your own.
Yeah. And Dr. Smith really unpacks the psychology behind it,
Yeah.
and how it can actually sabotage your relationship. It comes from that fear of disapproval or rejection,
Makes sense.
right? We want to be liked
Yeah.
and accepted. It's a very human need.
Especially for those of us who grew up in environments where we felt like we had to be good all the time
Oh, for sure.
to earn love and approval.
It can be a deeply ingrained pattern.
So it's almost like a survival mechanism.
It can be.
Yeah.
But the problem is when that desire to please others becomes excessive, it can really backfire.
Because you end up feeling resentful and burned out.
Yeah, and like you're losing yourself in the process.
You lose sight of your own needs.
Exactly. So how can we break free from those people-pleasing patterns?
Yeah, that's the question.
It can feel so hard to change those ingrained habits.
Yeah.
Dr. Smith talks about the importance of setting boundaries, which can be tough.
Oh, yeah. Especially if you're used to always saying yes.
I know I feel so guilty saying no to people.
Yeah, you feel like you're letting them down somehow.
Exactly. But setting boundaries means recognizing that it's okay to say no sometimes
Mm-hmm.
and to prioritize your own needs.
So it's not selfish to have boundaries.
Not at all. It's about respecting yourself
Okay.
and your time. And Dr. Smith also emphasizes the importance of self-awareness.
Yeah.
Understanding why you're so driven to please others.
Right.
And what are you so afraid of if you don't?
So dig into those deeper fears.
Exactly. And once you start to do that, you can start making choices that are truly aligned with your own values and needs, not just what other people expect of you.
Okay, so it's about reclaiming that sense of agency.
Yes.
Okay, let's move on to a topic that I think a lot of people would love to hear more about, building self-confidence.
Yeah, who doesn't want to feel more confident?
Exactly. But what's interesting is Dr. Smith kind of reframes the way we usually think about confidence.
Yeah.
It's not about being arrogant
No.
or never feeling insecure.
It's not about becoming some kind of fearless superhero.
So it's okay to still feel insecure sometimes.
Totally. In fact, embracing those vulnerabilities can actually make you more relatable and authentic.
Oh.
Yeah, true confidence comes from knowing that you're okay even with your flaws.
I like that.
She has this great quote. She says, "The only way to build true confidence is to be willing to be without it sometimes."
That's interesting. It seems kind of counterintuitive, but I think I get what she means.
It's about pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone and taking risks, even when you're feeling a bit afraid.
And those experiences, even if they don't go perfectly, help you to build resilience
Exactly.
and realize that you're capable of more than you thought.
You start to trust yourself more, knowing that you can handle challenges, even if you're not feeling 100% confident going into them.
I like that.
And she also talks about being your own best cheerleader instead of your own worst critic.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about it. That voice in my head never seems to shut up.
Right? So instead of listening to that inner critic all the time, she encourages us to be more compassionate with ourselves. Talk to ourselves the way we would talk to a good friend who is struggling.
What would you say to a friend who is feeling really down on themselves?
I'd remind them of all their amazing qualities, their past successes, and encourage them to focus on their progress, no matter how small.
Yeah.
Because all those little wins add up over time.
They do.
and they help to build that foundation of self-belief.
Now let's talk about self-acceptance for a minute, because I think there's a lot of confusion about what that actually means.
Yeah.
Some people think it means giving up on your goals or just becoming complacent.
Right. But Dr. Smith really emphasizes that self-acceptance is actually the foundation for growth and change. It's not about resigning yourself to your flaws. It's about acknowledging them and accepting yourself as a work in progress.
Okay, so it's about acknowledging that you're on a journey,
Exactly.
and you don't have to be perfect every step of the way.
And when you can accept yourself flaws and all, and it creates this space for self-compassion,
Yeah.
which, as we've talked about, is so essential for motivation and well-being.
So you're able to be kind to yourself when you make mistakes,
Yeah,
and to bounce back from setbacks more easily.
exactly. So self-acceptance doesn't mean giving up on growth.
Okay.
It means giving yourself that grace and space to grow.
Okay, I like that.
It's also important to remember that self-acceptance is an ongoing process. It's
Yeah.
not something you achieve overnight and then you're done.
Right.
It's a continuous journey of learning to appreciate and value yourself just as you are in each moment.
Okay, let's circle back to anxiety for a minute.
Okay.
It's a topic that comes up a lot in Dr. Smith's book.
Yeah, it's something that so many people experience.
It is, and she offers a really interesting perspective on anxiety. She kind of challenges this idea that it's always a bad thing.
Okay, so like we talked about earlier,
Yeah.
with that fight or flight response,
Right.
it can be helpful in certain situations.
It's there to protect us from danger.
Exactly. It
Yeah.
helps us stay alert and to take action when we need to.
Like if you're about to cross a busy street and you suddenly feel that surge of anxiety,
Yeah.
that might be your body's way of telling you, hey, look both ways before you cross.
All right, it's like your inner alarm system.
Yeah.
Going.
It's like a smoke alarm that goes off every time you burn toast.
That's a great analogy.
So sometimes our anxiety system gets a little too sensitive.
It does. And sometimes our anxiety becomes excessive or out of proportion to the actual threat. And that's when it can start to interfere with our lives.
So Dr. Smith helps us to understand how anxiety works, what triggers it, and most importantly, what we can do to manage it more effectively.
Exactly. And she offers a whole range of practical strategies for calming anxiety in the moment.
Yeah.
We've talked about breathing techniques and exercise.
Right, for regulating our nervous system.
Exactly. And she also emphasizes the importance of challenging those anxious thoughts.
Yeah, because those can really fuel the fire.
Those thoughts often involve worst-case scenarios and those what-ifs.
So you shouldn't just automatically believe every anxious thought that pops into your head.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
Dr. Smith encourages us to question those thoughts, to look for evidence that supports or contradicts them.
Okay, so it's like being a detective for your own mind.
Exactly. Examining those thoughts instead of blindly accepting them.
And considering alternative perspectives.
Exactly. Maybe the situation isn't as dire as your anxiety is making it seem.
Right.
So instead of getting caught up in those anxious thought patterns, try to step back and ask yourself, is this thought helpful? Is it based on facts? What's another way of looking at this situation?
So it's about recognizing that you have the power to choose how you respond to those anxious thoughts.
Exactly.
Now let's shift gears and talk about stress.
Okay.
Because in today's world, it can feel like stress is just an unavoidable part of life.
It's everywhere you turn.
It is deadlines at work, traffic jams, family drama, social media. It can feel like you're constantly being bombarded with stressors.
It's true. But Dr. Smith helps us to understand that stress isn't inherently a bad thing.
Wait, so a little bit of stress can actually be good for you?
It can. In fact, it can be beneficial in certain situations. Think about it. Stress can motivate us, help us to focus, and even enhance our performance.
So it's like that extra little boost of energy that helps you to power through a difficult task.
Exactly. It's that challenge response we talked about earlier.
So it's all about finding that balance.
Yeah, right.
Because when stress becomes chronic, it can really take a toll.
It can lead to burnout exhaustion, sleep problems, digestive issues, even weaken your immune system. So finding healthy ways to manage stress is so crucial.
So how can we manage stress effectively?
Dr. Smith offers a whole toolkit of strategies.
Oh, good.
She talks about the importance of self-care. Remember those defense players we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
Those are especially important when you're feeling stressed. Make sure you're getting enough sleep, eating nutritious food, moving your body, and taking time for yourself to relax and recharge.
It's so easy to let those things slide when you're feeling overwhelmed.
It is, but they're essential for building resilience.
So true.
Dr. Smith also encourages us to reframe our relationship with stress. Instead of seeing it as the enemy, try to view it as a challenge, an opportunity for growth.
So shift your perspective.
Exactly. Instead of saying, I can't handle this.
Yeah.
Try saying, this is tough, but I'm going to do my best.
Yeah.
It's about focusing on what you can control
Yeah.
and recognizing that you have the resources to cope, even with difficult situations.
Okay, so it's about finding that inner strength and resilience to navigate those stressful times.
Now let's dive into a really profound topic that Dr. Smith explores the meaning of life.
Ooh, that's a big one.
It's a question that I think we all grapple with at some point, whether
Yeah.
we realize it or not.
And Dr. Smith challenges this common idea that happiness is the ultimate goal in life.
It's not all about chasing those feel-good moments.
Not necessarily. Dr. Smith suggests that it's actually meaning and purpose that give our lives that richness and sense of fulfillment. So it's about feeling like your life has a purpose and that you're making a difference in the world.
Exactly. Dr. Smith encourages us to think about our values, those things that are truly important to us, and to
Yeah.
live in a way that's aligned with those values.
Okay, so it's about asking yourself, what matters most to me? And then figuring out how you can bring more of that into your life.
Exactly. And she also talks about the importance of feeling connected to something larger than ourselves.
Yeah.
Whether it's your community, a cause, you believe in nature even,
Yeah.
feeling like you're part of something bigger
Right.
can give you like a really powerful sense of purpose and significance.
It's about finding that sense of belonging and connection
Exactly.
that makes you feel like you're a part of something bigger than yourself.
Yeah. Okay, let's bring this conversation back to relationships, which we touched on earlier.
Yeah.
They play such an essential role in our well-being and can be a major source of meaning and connection in our lives.
So what are Dr. Smith's top tips for building healthy and fulfilling relationships?
She emphasizes open communication, empathy, and setting those boundaries,
Yeah.
which we've talked about before. But they're especially important in the context of relationships.
Yeah.
Being able to express your needs and feelings clearly, being able to listen to and understand your partner's perspective, and knowing where your limits are.
It's about being mindful of your own needs and expectations within the relationship.
Because if your expectations are unrealistic,
Yeah.
you're setting yourself up for disappointment and conflict.
Right. It's like expecting your partner to read your mind.
Exactly, or to always agree with you on everything.
Right.
It's important to remember that your partner is a separate individual with their own thoughts, feelings, and needs.
And finally, she reminds us that relationships are a journey, not a destination.
I love that.
It's so true.
They take effort, they take communication, and a willingness to grow and evolve together.
It's about embracing the ups and downs, the challenges and the joys,
Yeah.
knowing that you're both learning and growing along the way. And speaking of journeys, Dr. Smith ends the book with a question I think that really captures this whole idea of living a meaningful life.
Oh, I like that. Let's hear it.
She asks, if you knew you only had a year to live, what would you do differently?
Wow, that is powerful.
Yeah.
It really makes you stop and think about what truly matters.
Right. Like it forces you to confront those priorities and think about how you want to spend your precious time.
Because ultimately, that awareness of our own mortality can be a powerful motivator, to live a more intentional life.
More fulfilling life.
Appreciate the present moment. Let go of the things that aren't truly serving you.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Dr. Smith's incredible book, I encourage you to really sit with that question.
Yeah, let it guide your choices, your actions, your relationships.
Because life is short, and it's up to us to make the most of it, to find meaning and purpose and joy in each and every day.
And remember, you don't have to do it alone. Dr. Smith's book is a fantastic resource, but you can also reach out to friends, families, a therapist, anyone who can offer support.
We're all in this together.